Hello and welcome to When Grooms Get Engaged, a podcast about a guy's perspective on wedding planning from two guys that just read their own. I'm Steve.
And I'm Chris. And each week we'll talk about how we navigated a different part of the wedding planning journey, what we learned in the process, and what maybe we wish we had done differently. Steve, what are we discussing this week?
Chris, this week we're talking about the day of timeline. And it's really important to understand that just because you have a wedding date set up, you don't just show up to your wedding. You need to have a detailed game plan by the hour, by the half an hour sometimes, of everything that has to happen. So, Chris, I don't know about you, but for us, this is where our wedding planner helped us out a ton. This is where that expertise really comes in handy. And this is where what you're paying them is going to really kind of show their worth.
Yeah, and so you can download a lot of timelines. There's a lot of great resources out there, and they're very helpful. But what's nice is that you have a professional when you have that person in the room actually looking over your document, being like, did you think about this? Or did you think about that? Or their expertise is also knowing how long things take, because you can maybe either over or underestimate certain things. So having them take a look at this document is going to be super important, and they'll be able to point out maybe some flaws or stuff that you didn't think about. But there are a lot of great resources out there to kind of help you get started. So we don't want you to feel overwhelmed, but we'll just kind of take this piece by piece to maybe help you formulate your timeline and day of plan.
Yeah. And if you don't have a wedding planner, it's not to say that this can't be done. It obviously can be. It just means that on the day of, you, as the bride and groom getting married, aren't going to be able to look over this. You're going to have to kind of put it on someone else and trust someone to just make sure things are going as planned. It's just this is one of the things that wedding planner does take off your plate and just makes it so much easier.
It's like a playbook, right? And it's you might now know everything about your wedding and know exactly how it's supposed to happen, but this allows you to communicate what you want done and what you need done for your day to go flawlessly. So this is what you're also going to be sharing with all of your vendors, to make sure everyone's on the same page, showing up on time, what their responsibilities are. So this is really also something that's going to need to be shared externally, so that you can make sure that everything gets done the way you envision.
And Chris, I think one of the best things to figure out is starting from when your wedding is supposed to start. Because from there, you can kind of work backwards at everything you need to fill. Because, Chris, what is the thing that's going to always be first? Thing that people are going to be waking up super early to get done.
Yeah, absolutely. Hair and makeup for the ladies is going to be number one. And there's a lot that goes into it, right? So like number one is how big is the bridal party, because
Mhm.
that can make things take so much longer. And this is also something that you should be discussing with your makeup artist and potentially their team, right? Like how many people are they bringing in to help do all the hair and makeup, and having that team ready to go is going to determine how long you need. You might need to have three, four, makeup artists or more to make sure that everyone's taken care of and done on time. So that's going to be a critical piece. And that is kind of like the first domino to fall, to make sure that everything else stays on time.
Yeah, and it's important when you are figuring out hair and makeup that you don't forget anyone. Like nieces, cousins, moms and mother-in-laws, all these people will take some amount of time usually. And Chris, like you mentioned, when you kind of start figuring out your count, you might need, let's say you have three people to get ready. You're okay with one person, more than likely. If you have 10 people, right, you might need two. If it goes up from there, you might have to start adding people, and that's an expense. Understanding that, it tells you when to start. And like Chris, I know we've talked about this before, but I've known weddings where the church is going to be 2, 3 p.m. and hair and makeup starting at 6:30 a.m. Give you an idea of how much time you get for all that.
And I think it's also important to communicate with those family members that potentially are a part of the wedding that may or may not want hair and makeup done, or maybe want one versus the other. But making sure you ask them repeatedly throughout the planning process, because they might initially say, no, I can do it myself. And then they think about it a little bit more and then they want to do it. So just, communicate and ask a few times just to make sure that you don't have a couple last minute requests and people showing up, knocking on your suite, looking for hair and makeup, and you didn't plan for it. No, there's not enough people to make sure you get done on time. So again, just as we've talked about throughout this about wedding planning, is like communication and asking the same question maybe a couple times just to make sure that people are set with what they want to do.
And after hair and makeup, usually your photographers and possibly wedding planner, if you have one, will start showing
Mhm.
up.
Yep.
You can get the photographers earlier. You're going to pay more for it if you want to take pictures of hair and makeup, people getting ready. I know some girls like the breakfast shots or like the bridal parties in like robes or something. But in general, they're going to come after the hair and makeup when everyone's hair is done and they all look beautiful. But you kind of need to decide how many hours of photography you're going to be buying at this point and how many photographers. Because Chris, it's not just the girls getting ready; it's also the guys.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we had two photographers. One was following Catherine, and then there was one following us on the guy side. So we kind of both had those setup shots, and then we ended up doing something differently. So we went out for other photos around the city, and then came back together for the ceremony and the reception. And that's another piece of this, right, that we maybe didn't touch on initially, is you kind of have to think about the first two things are, where is the ceremony and where is the reception? Because if you're having it at a church, then you have to factor in transportation time, and just time for people to get from A to B. So just think about that as you're planning.
Yeah. And then, Chris, like you mentioned, you guys did pictures, right? You have your first looks potentially if you're going to be doing it then, and you got to find out where in that time frame before the actual ceremony are you going to put in your first looks. And again, this goes back to how early are you going to start to make sure all this stuff gets fit in. Because realistically, first looks are going to take you just the actual shots, 15, 20 minutes maybe. But
Mm-hmm.
Chris, you mentioned transportation. You got to go from one spot to another. How far is it from the hotel? How far is it from this? How far is it from that? You can't forget these things because half an hour pushes everything else forward and then puts everything else behind. And then people lose dance time. They lose, socializing time. They lose time at the end of the ceremony if you mess up the beginning of, getting ready and stuff.
Yeah, I'll bring it up again. This is exactly where a wedding planner from the beginning, not just a day of coordinator, is going to show their worth in making sure that this is all coordinated. You have transportation lined up, you have like Ubers, you have potentially someone from the wedding planning company like with each party to make sure everyone's on track, communicating with each other, and making sure that you're leaving on time to get to all your different places. So super important again. So like your first pass for this timeline specifically is probably going to be very generic, very basic, starting off maybe, like 90 days out. You're maybe blocking every hour and just saying like, this is for the ceremony, this is for the reception, we're here, there, photos, first look, just those basics. And then you're going to start going in and fine tuning everything probably to every half an hour, or more likely like every 15 minutes, to make sure that everything stays on time.
Yeah, and at the end of this conversation, Chris, I actually have my day of timeline. We'll kind of go over that, give you an idea of how many things kind of fit in. But before that, you know, at this point at midday is when your other vendors going to start showing up. Big one is any transportation you may or may not have called on. This would be party buses. This would be shuttles. This would be any Ubers that you need to take you around to those photo shoots if you're doing it at a church. If you're doing that stuff, I know some wedding parties like the party buses. They kind of just get drunk before they go wherever they need to go. That starts showing up. So this is kind of what you expect at the midday. And while this is happening, Chris, I know you need to kind of start thinking about decorating the actual venue itself. Where again, a wedding planner or friends and family that you trust that is going to have to come in.
Yeah, and when you're putting this together, like you need to communicate like for transportation, right? And you had shuttle, so maybe you can talk on this a little bit more. But I'm assuming there was probably like you need to be at X location at this time, and then potentially 15 to 30 minutes later, that is our departure time, right? Don't tell them to show up at 9 o'clock when you need to leave at 9, right? Otherwise, that's just going to cause chaos. There's too much risk for them to be late. So, you're going to tell them to be there at 8:30, wait for you, and then your departure time is actually 9. So kind of like factor in those buffer zones, especially for something like transportation.
Yeah, I know what we did. So we had our wedding in Greece, and there was three or four main hotels that kind of housed everybody. So thankfully, we didn't have to have too many pickups. But what we did is we had like captains at each hotel where we would give them the information. And Chris, I think Cat might have been one of them for where you guys were staying, where we're like, hey, we need to make sure everyone is ready by this time because the shuttle's going to pick up at this time and they're not going to really come back. So this is something that if you are going to be having transportation, you need to find a way to make sure that your guests know exactly what it is, when they're expected to be there, and to know that potentially that's not coming back. They're either on that shuttle or they're not, because you can't hold up 20 people for one. At some point, you are going to need to make a cutoff. So, Chris, that's a very good call out to just kind of have communication. We're going to keep going back to this. Just make sure you're communicating correctly. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, and then having those conversations like we talked about in our episode when you're like 30 days out, having that communication with those vendors to, and you should have kind of this rough sketch timeline already done by around that time so that you can walk through with the DJ, with the florist, with whoever's doing decorations, walk through what you're anticipating and what you think should happen, and let them weigh in and be open to their feedback because they are experts. They've probably done hundreds, if not thousands, of weddings. And so you might have, I don't know, put an hour for flower decorations to be put out. And they're like, no, that's going to take 2 hours. Or they're like, no, that's going to take 15 minutes. So they can give you a lot of important feedback on how things should be done, and just be open to that and like incorporate their feedback into timeline.
Yeah. So at this point, after you kind of get your first look pictures, you get your transportation in, you're going to presumably going to either the venue or the church. If you're going to the church, the good thing about it is that the church is on its own timeline. You just got to make sure to adhere to that. But if you are going to the church, usually you're going to probably have like the moms going maybe before. They're going to do like maybe some small decorations when it comes to that. Maybe you have additional flowers in the church. But usually churches are beautiful. You don't have to do much, which is nice. Um, but the big thing to kind of consider is the after the church timeline. So this is where you got to bake in how much time do guests need to get to the reception hall? How much time do you need for pictures? How much time do you need at the church for pictures? This is a big one that a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
don't realize. After you get married at a church, usually the family will stay back and will take pictures. And this could be as short as half an hour. This could be as much as an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on how many people you want to take pictures by. And Chris, we've talked about this before. This is very important. Have a list of the pictures you want taken,
Yes.
just so that you don't forget anything, and B, roughly how long is it going to take, so where you can give up some time and where you can't.
And I think it's important to then also communicate our
Communicate,
special
yeah.
word of the day to those people that are going to be in those pictures, so you can anticipate like, hey, you need to stick around after the ceremony to take pictures, or
Exactly.
you're gonna be up first, so be ready to go right after the ceremony, or you might be the second team in or something
Hmm.
like that, and so they're going to be like there 10 or 15 minutes later. So just making sure that they stick around and they know that they're going to be included in those pictures, so they don't leave and go to the reception or go somewhere else, or just not thinking about it, and maybe going to talk to everyone. Like, your family's there, your friends are there, they might get distracted. So just trying to keep them on track and know what's expected of them on the day of. And again, you're going to have to factor in time because like after the ceremony, that's almost like the first time your family's getting to interact with you at that point, and you just got newly married, and everyone's going to want to like shake your hand, give you a hug, and talk to you. And that can take a long time, and you kind of have to keep the line moving. And again, your wedding planner comes in great here to kind of keep that flow, keep things moving. You're excited to see everybody, but you also have a lot of things you need to execute to make sure that everything gets done on time. So again, just a lot to think about, and things that you think might take 15 minutes are probably taking 30, 45 minutes instead, just because everyone's so excited and wants your attention.
Yeah, this is where you could really start kind of, if you have a strict timeline, this is the part when, like Chris, like I mentioned, everyone is seeing you for the first time, especially if you have a lot of people that want to say hi, congratulate you, whatever. Like this is all coming from a place of love that will bog you down. Or let's say you want to take groomsmen photos and one of your guys was partying too hard the night before on the party bus and you can't find
Bad
him.
move.
Like, but these are things happen. Like you don't know. Like you got to figure out what you're gonna do. But this part will be stressful. You'll get your pictures. It's gonna look beautiful, and then you kind of need to figure out how far is the wedding, the church to the actual venue, and
Mm-hmm.
when does your cocktail hour itself start?
Yep.
Because you might want to take more pictures in between that. Go somewhere.
Yeah, and are there shuttles, or are people driving? And then do people live nearby? So are they going to go back home for? Again, there's a lot to factor in. So again, just communicating what's expected and probably building in 15-minute buffer, telling people to be somewhere at 6:15 or 6 o'clock, and they don't need to be there until 6:15 is probably like a good plan.
That's really smart, especially if people are out of town. They don't really know the area. If you're expecting them to kind of figure it out, give them more time. And then let's say you're doing this in like the middle of rush hour.
Yep.
Traffic is going to be a concern. Just kind of things to
Parking.
think about. Parking
Yeah.
is going to be a bad one. It all comes down to how long is it going to take it to get from point A to point B.
And, something we'll touch on, I think now may be a good idea is like, as we're talking about your ceremony too, like part of the timeline is communicating to the band or the, people maybe playing classical music or the DJ or the master of ceremonies, like communicating your song choices and where everything should be played and with whom. Again, communicating that or having these conversations 30 days out so that they know exactly when they're supposed to play XYZ song and kind of make sure this is another part of the timeline, right? Is making sure that everything is executed the way you want to and communicating like these are the songs to be played when I walk down the aisle or
Mm-hmm.
the bride walks down the aisle, etc. It's not only just a reception, it is also the ceremony too.
Yeah, and Chris, talking about the DJ, I used to work at banquet halls back in the day. And let's say we would have a cocktail hour that would start at like 6 p.m. It wouldn't be uncommon for the DJ to show up at 3 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
Set up their sound equipment.
Lighting,
Lighting is a
usual.
big one. Do a sound test, make sure everything sounds okay, like nothing is funky. So again, everything starts way before you think it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And like you mentioned, the DJ is very important, Chris. You got to make sure this guy is showing up, this guy or girl. So check in with them as well, that they're there on time, early, getting everything ready. And like you mentioned, all these songs, all these moments, we're going to go through like, again, my day of timeline. There are so many little songs. These are cut into like 5 minute increments. That's how
Mm-hmm.
detailed it gets, especially if you have a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people you got to introduce, which is absolutely crazy. But, you know, everything went great. You're going to the reception hall, or potentially your actual reception. You're going to have the wedding ceremony there as well. Chris, you mentioned a really good thing here. Do you need to flip the room? This could take a lot of time, especially let's say you have a smaller room or a room that serves as both your actual like banquet and your ceremony, right? You're gonna have chairs set for both of them. How much time do you need to flip one into the other? And how do you build that in so you maximize that time and also don't like lose track of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a conversation again to have with your venue and your caterer. Thankfully for us, our venue and our caterer were the same. So there was, miscommunication or room for miscommunication on who was responsible for what. You need to have these conversations because for us, since we had our ceremony and our reception in the same place, there was a delicate ballet going on behind the scenes to ensure that everything was done correctly. So it was a big space, but we did have pipe and drape over one half of the room. So we had our ceremony in one, and also behind the pipe and drape that we had hidden away was a bunch of the tables that were already kind of almost preset, so that once we were done with our ceremony, they could immediately start moving those tables. So they were cleverly hidden behind the pipe and drape, so they weren't in shots, but they were like ready to go and almost like pre-assembled in a way with all the decorations and everything. And all they needed to do was just be carried out into the the diagram that we had kind of set up with the venue. So again, have that communication, and there's probably going to be some give and take on how you do things when you have the ceremony and the reception in the same space.
Yeah, Chris, this is one of the things that pissed me off so much about our wedding. We did something similar where, the ceremony, the reception was in the same spot, divided by like 20 feet. But for whatever reason, we could not reuse the chairs.
Oh
So we
yeah.
had to
Mm-hmm.
rent out two sets of chairs.
Yep.
I was so annoyed. Anyway,
Yeah,
regardless.
yeah. Well, yeah, and to go along with that, so like after our ceremony, thankfully were able to use the same chairs. So it was crazy just how quick they do it. So as we're taking photos near our arch and with the backdrop of Grant Park in Chicago, everything's going well. Our pictures all look great, but we're facing the room, and you could just see like all of the chairs immediately starting to disappear to go be set up in the other space, in the other part of the room. So again, it's a very quick process. But talking like, yeah, something as simple as chairs. Are we reusing the same chairs, or do we have to rent a whole new set in order for this to happen? And obviously, those come with budgetary concerns.
You guys also had a cool thing where all the guests could go down a level for the
Yeah,
happy hour.
yeah,
So they didn't see
kind
any
of
of
hidden.
that, like, not disaster, but like
Yeah,
commotion,
the
just moving
chaos.
stuff around,
Yeah,
like chaos.
the
Yeah, yeah,
organized
exactly.
chaos. Yeah.
Organized chaos. Yeah, they just drank. They were good. They were happy. So now everything is set up, and this is when we talked about the DJ, the 5 minute increments. This is where you're going to have all of your songs. You know, you need a song for the bridal party to come out. You need a song for the mom and dad to come out. You need a song for flower girls to come out. You need a song for bride and groom to be much of bride and groom. They're going to need a couple songs, and these are kind of done in like the whole song isn't played, but you'll have like a minute for this people to come out, a minute for these people to come out, and this is where your DJ needs to be on point to make sure you don't miss a beat on it.
Yeah, super important. We had it exactly the same way in our timeline. You know, it's like a 5 minute increment of this is going to be played for these people, XYZ. And then it's also, you know, that's ceremony, but there's also reception of like entrance music, of like, you know, everyone's ready, excited, and ready to party. So everyone has their own kind of like intro music, what's being played during dinner. And then what's, you know, couples dance, as you said, and then also just the general vibe of what you want played at your wedding, right? For dancing. And again, what's all happening during this time is you're probably getting pulled away to do a lot of, you know, a lot more photo shoots, right? So I know we've mentioned it a million times, but making sure that, especially in that beginning part, maybe even putting it in your timeline when you're getting ready, eat
Mhm.
breakfast. You know, there's a potential that you're not going to eat until dinner, or potentially way late into the night because you're just pulled in 1,000 different directions. So eat a good breakfast, and make sure that's part of your plan. Order room service, order things for the ladies or the guys, just to make sure that everyone's well fed ahead of time.
Yeah. And Chris, you also mentioned this special events or traditions, and specifically where you're going to put them. If you are doing non traditional American things, this might also need an extra 5 minutes to explain what this thing is, right? Otherwise, your guests will be just confused. So, and you also got to figure out when it makes the most sense to put this in. I know, Chris, you guys did a tea ceremony kind of in the middle of dinner hour or
Yep.
the
Yep,
dinner time,
exactly.
which is
So
a perfect time to do it.
yeah, we wanted people to still be able to eat and talk and whatnot, but also then having this kind of be part of it so everyone can kind of see it, view it, put on a little bit of a show in a way, like during dinner. So it was very important to us. But again, like it was nice because our wedding planner had done mixed traditions or mixed weddings before, and so knew all about the tea ceremony, how to communicate that. She spoke Mandarin, was able to do a lot of the readings in Mandarin and kind of explanations as well as in English, so that was like super helpful. But if you're doing these maybe, you know, non-traditional American things, you might have to over communicate exactly what you're
Hmm.
trying to do, maybe share videos. And again, this is all come into that communication piece well in advance so that everything happens flawlessly on the day of. There should be nothing left to chance or any questions on the day of.
Yeah. And once you kind of figure this out, the reason why we're harping on communication, make sure you have it ready, is because especially in America, a lot of these weddings are on a hard cutoff 11:30 p.m. 11:30 midnight in that ballpark. And the later all this stuff goes, the less time you have for dancing, less time you have for late night snacks, less time you have for socializing. And you're going to begin to realize very quickly that when it's your wedding, the only time you guys have to yourselves is literally the last 2 to 3 hours of dancing. Because that's when all photos are, for the most part, done. People have finished eating, congratulating you, and then you can kind of enjoy the party and enjoy each other's company. So if you screw this up, you're going to pretty much run out of time to enjoy all these things, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's going to be super critical. There could also be, you know, financial penalties if you know, miss certain deadlines with your venue, because if it's a busy weekend or during a busy time of the year, that venue probably has weddings lined up each day during the weekend. So there's a Friday, there's a Saturday and a Sunday wedding. So you going over or not striking everything completely and tearing everything down causes problems for them and causes problems for the other weddings maybe behind you if you're near the front of the line. So something to be very cognizant about. So like for us, we needed to have everything ended by 12, and all the vendors had to have everything out of the venue by 1 a.m. And that was a hard deadline. And so again, our wedding planners earning their keep helped ensure that everything was taken care of, and also collected a lot of things for us, gifts and miscellaneous outfit changes that we had, and just anything that was maybe left behind or decorations that we wanted to keep afterwards. They kind of had collected everything in a box and was able to drop it off at our hotel room, which was amazing.
Yeah, Chris, you mentioned something very important. You need to also factor time for the after ceremony. Like you said, you guys need to be out by 1 o'clock. You know, maybe some venues will give you until 2 o'clock. Regardless, there'll be a time when you got to get all your crap out of there so that they don't have to deal with it. And If you don't, either A, they're going to charge you a fee, or they're just
Yeah.
going to toss it.
Yeah.
Whatever the case may be. You do not want to ignore this at all. And this is where, like Chris, your wedding planner was able to carry all those things for you. Or maybe you have some family members that you trust that you kind of put them in charge. But this is the last thing that you do not want to forget about because it could kind of ruin what is otherwise a great night.
Yeah. And part of this calculus comes down to storage and what can be stored when. Your venue might have limited space, so you might not be able to drop things off the day before, or you can only drop things off a certain number of hours before. Similarly, at the end of the night when you're tearing down, they might not be able to store all your decorations or everything else
Mm-hmm.
afterwards because they might be storing stuff for the wedding that's the following day. So again, this is something that you need to have lined up or thought about ahead of time because you might have to factor in transportation of getting all your decorations to the venue on the day of, or having to take everything with you at the end of the night. So again, just having thought through the entire process, even you want to be blissfully asleep at 2 a.m., or you might have an after party somewhere else until 4 a.m., but your vendors are there trying to strike down. If they don't get out on time, you're going to be penalized financially. So you have to think through this and make sure there's a plan.
Yeah. And speaking of your vendors, Chris, you're paying them by the hour effectively. Every package you have, let's say photography, you have 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours. DJ, you have, 5, 6 hours. So if they go over, you're gonna pay for that. So don't make them go over because usually that fee is pretty steep, pretty expensive.
Pretty steep. It gets expensive quick.
Yeah,
I
unfortunately.
think this is probably a good time. Do you want to quickly roll through maybe your
Yeah.
timeline just so people can get a sense of what they should be thinking about?
So when we were putting this timeline on, we had originally set it to be a 6 p.m. reception, 6 p.m. wedding ceremony. We pushed it back to 6:30 just because it was going to be a little hot at 6, so 6:30 let us kind of get cooler faster. But just to give you an idea of how early we're starting for how when the people are going to get there. 10 a.m. is when our wedding planner arrives with a lot of the flowers. 10 a.m. is also when the stylist arrives to prepare, the bridesmaids, the maid of honor, the moms, the nieces, all that stuff. At 2 p.m., that's when Gina's hair and makeup is starting. We actually pushed that back a little bit earlier. At 2 p.m. is also when the videographer and the photographer start, right? To do their getting ready photos. At 2:30 p.m. until 4 p.m., that is my getting ready photos with the guys. At the same time is also my hair getting ready, me getting dressed. Gina's makeup was supposed to be done at 3:30 p.m. At 3:40, Gina's supposed to be getting dressed. At 4, uh, Gina's portraits, and also like in her dress and with her bridesmaids.
Mm-hmm.
Right? At 4:30, 4:40 is the couple's first looks with our portraits. At 5:30 is when the guests are supposed to be arriving, and there's a separate timeline with the shuttles and like when they're going to show up to each hotel. This is when we sent text messages to people like, "Hey, you're going to be here at 5:30, but the shuttle may be coming to your place at 4:30."
And that actually brings up one little quick point too, is that you probably want to have a master document of like
Mm-hmm.
everyone's phone numbers, names, and responsibilities
Yes.
so that that can be shared with a number of different people. So in case you need their help or someone's in charge of something, everyone has access to document, to text, to call to make sure that people are on time. So that's a
Mm-hmm.
great point.
Yeah. So 5:30 guests are arriving, and this is when we had our like guitar music starting. Essentially, we had 2 hours of just two guys playing, and during this time, guests are taking their seat, and then at exactly 5:55 p.m. So like right before the ceremony, this is when Gina's supposed to be walking down the aisle. And then the ceremony was to end 20 minutes later, right? Half an hour later at 6:30, and which at that point the cocktail hour starts prompt, right? From 6:30 to 7:30. And that's when our guitars stop, and the DJ is supposed to start as soon as the cocktail hour stops. So that's when you have a switch up. So again, if you screw this up, you might have to pay an extra half an hour for the guitars. However, cocktail hour in between that, between 6:30 and 7, we have group photos. So we're not eating, we're not drinking. And then the guests are going to their dinner tables. We do touch-ups during this time, and then at 7:45 we enter. That's what we enter as like, bride and groom. And the first dance starts immediately afterwards, right? Then at just about 8 is when speeches start. And then 15 minutes later, the dinner starts. However, the dinner is also when we have the best lighting for photos. So that's when we're out taking
Yep.
photos,
As it happens.
eating nothing, because
Yep.
it's like sunset. You have the most beautiful light. It's amazing. Dinner ends at 10 o'clock, and that's when the open bar starts. Like during dinner,
Thank
people can get
God.
like, I know, right? During dinner, people can get like wine, beer, like Cokes and stuff. But open bar starts promptly again at 10 o'clock. 10:05, we had the espresso martini. So this thing took maybe 15 minutes to put together. So it was in our actual day of timeline. 5 minutes later is the cake cutting. Don't forget that, right? 5 minutes after that is the mother son dance. And then 5 minutes after that is the father daughter dance, right? And then, Chris, we mentioned timing on this. At 11:30, that's when our photography package ends.
Hmm.
So if we screwed up any of these things, we may have missed something, right? And then at that point, this is also where, like you mentioned, you go up against city ordinances. We couldn't have the main dance floor past 11:30, otherwise the village was gonna fine us. We had to move that to a separate part of the actual villa. So at that point, that is also the day of timeline. Right? 11:30, we move the party somewhere else, and then at two a.m., that's when the bar and the DJ package effectively ends. So that's when they're cutting it off, and then we had to schedule a last shuttle at 2 and 2:30 a.m. to get people out of there so they can go home. Because like you're in Greece, you're like, where are you going to get a taxi at 2 a.m. unless you know someone, right? Unless you
Yeah.
build that connection at some
Yeah.
point. We
That's
had,
that's true. Like it's
yeah.
different in different countries, right? Like just
Hmm.
what the attitudes are or how late people work. Quick story, I remember being in Puerto Rico and like after I think it was like 9 p.m., like it was you were kind of on your own unless you
Hmm.
really had a strong hookup somewhere for
Yep.
someone to come get you, or it was like a very big roll of the dice. So you had to be prepared. So something to think about as you're planning a international wedding.
Some people, if you're comfortable with this, like let's say when you first go somewhere and you get a cabbie, let's say you like them, slip them like a 20 or a 50 or whatever, get his number, be like, hey, listen, I'm going to be here. I trust you. Like, I'll take care of you. Take me where I need to go. Like, that's something people do, just if you're comfortable with it. But yeah, Chris, in this day of list, this changed quite a bit the day before, right? We shifted things around. We push things back, we push things forward. On the actual wedding day, like some of the things didn't happen as they were supposed to happen.
Mm.
Like even having a plan doesn't mean it's going to be executed perfectly. However, having a plan ensures you a much greater chance of success versus just going blind, hoping it happens, hope for the best.
It's
So
because then
yeah,
you don't
put this
forget
together.
something, right? So if
Yeah.
you adjust something, you know how that affects things on either end, or and then you can be like, hey, we're cutting that, we're not doing that
Hmm.
anymore, or we have to push it back and allow more time, and then something else maybe needs to get cut. So again, it's just making sure that you fully realize the impact of certain things if you go a
Hmm.
little bit long or cut things a little bit short.
Yeah, exactly. So put this together, memorize it, make sure you're both on the same page with it. And then anyone that needs to arrive at any time, make sure they're on the same page. So, Chris, you mentioned reach out to vendors, make sure they know when they're supposed to arrive. Groomsmen, maid of honors, flower girls, whatever, make sure they know when they're supposed to arrive. Make sure all the girls know when they're ready. Make sure, all the guys know when they're going to have to show up. Make sure they know not to get slogged, before like they got to get up there. Make sure anyone that's giving any speeches knows they're giving speeches. They know that when they're in this. There's a lot of little admin work, and this is probably the least fun thing, in my opinion. It's not fun.
And to take it full circle, so just similar to you and our plan, vendors prep was 8:30 a.m.
Hmm.
9 a.m. was hair and makeup artists arrive, and then that was basically hair and makeup, hair and makeup, hair and makeup. Guys get ready at 11:30, start
I
getting
remember.
ready.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
great.
3 hours later, and then basically hair and makeup complete by 1:30 p.m. So it was
So much
basically
time.
a 9 a.m. start and a 1:30 finish, and we didn't have 10 people on either side. But
Hmm.
again, you might be starting at 6 a.m. if you have more people.
Yeah, yeah. It's crazy, but yeah, Chris, this is definitely a lot for our fellow grooms to think about.
Yep.
Don't leave it for the last day. Just kind of keep looking at it as you kind of lead into it, so you don't forget anything.
Hmm.
Chris, anything else you want to bring up?
No, again, this is your playbook. This is
Hmm.
your Bible. This is, just what you're sharing with everybody and what you're going to try to stick to throughout the day. So again, take the time to fill it out. It's going to change a million times before you get up to the wedding, but it's just a super important step to make sure that everything's accounted for. And again, at the end of the day, it's going to be how the vision of your wedding gets executed. Just take it seriously and make sure it's detailed. So that's all I'll say.
Well said, Chris. Well, everyone, like and subscribe. Chris, I'll see you soon.
See you next time.